REIS, Real Estate Investors Society.
Case studies, videos, and the like.
Did the entire renovation.
I do commercial real estate.
REIS, the business of real estate investing.
There's a lot of property out there that we're networking.
Have to be careful with each one.
The purpose of tonight's event, we call it Connecting with Intent, which is a lot different than networking. Networking in its own sense is you go out, you meet an individual, you give them your business card, you exchange business cards, and you may or may not follow up depending on what your philosophy is and what your systems you have in place. And you may or may not get business from that. Well, tonight, our goal is to talk about what I call connecting with intent. And the purpose behind connecting with intent is just that. You connect with someone with the intent to do business. As Ms. Burley talked about earlier, our intention was not to fill the room because what we believe in is quality, not quantity. I'd rather have 10 people in here that's doing business than 100 people in here just talking. And so with that being said, we have a nice little way that we're going to kick off our event tonight. Now, as we talk about real estate investing, we're going to spotlight 3 different real estate investors who are adamant and professionals and have over 10 years experience each in the real estate investment business. Now, the spotlight is going to be a lot different than coming to an event and hearing someone give you a lecture or a presentation. Spotlight is intended to really put the host, or the guest, on the spotlight and ask them specific pinpoint questions as relates to real estate investing so you can benefit the most for that. First person on the hot seat is real estate attorney, Ms. Nancy Gusman. How you doing today, Nancy?
I am just wonderful.
Great. Well, welcome to the hot seat.
Thanks.
Now, let's start off with the basic question to set the context. What's your name, your company, and your business?
I'm Nancy Gusman. I am a real estate attorney with Montero Law Group in Silver Spring. I do both commercial and residential real estate transactions, and one of my niche specialties is working with investors to make sure that they're keeping it correct. I tell people I do everything other people can't do, won't do, or shouldn't do.
Okay, I like that. Now, you kind of answered the second question, the first question, but what is your niche, your value-added proposition?
My niche, my value-added proposition is the fact that I specialize in the harder types of transactions. I specialize in investors and trying to keep them legal and structuring their transactions and completing their transactions. I like to do small commercial. There's a gap out there for the smaller commercial transactions, and I do that.
Excellent. Okay. Now, what advice would you give investors looking to engage in short sales?
My primary thing that I tell people working with short sales is that it's never okay for a buyer to negotiate directly with a seller's lender. And I know that there's a lot of information out there that tells you that that's a good way to go about investing, but there's an inherent conflict of interest.
Okay. What about wholesaling?
Wholesaling, you really just have to be careful. Each one, for me, it's a deal-by-deal type of thing. You need to make sure that you can justify your wholesale fee, and you need to make sure that everybody in the transaction is on board and understands how the transaction is working.
Okay, how about renovating and selling?
Renovating and selling, you should keep track of your expenses and keep track of what exactly you're doing. A lot of lenders nowadays have what they call seasoning requirements, and they're going to want you to prove how the property went from your acquisition price to your resale value over the time period.
Okay. And what about buying and holding?
Buying and holding, the biggest thing that I can tell you is if you're buying a property that's already tenant occupied, to make sure that your seller is providing you with all of the correct documentation and information. Don't just take their word for it as to what the tenancy value is and whether the tenant is a good tenant or not. Oh, and security deposits have to be transferred as well. And you want proof that they're holding the security deposits in a legal manner.
Okay. Now, throughout the years of experience that you have, what are some of the most common problems or mistakes that you see real estate investors make?
I think that the most common issues that I see is that they got information at some sort of a seminar or a webinar or late night television, and they're following it. And what those organizations teach is not necessarily legal, and especially it may not be legal in the state that you're trying to do it.
Okay. Now let me ask you one of the challenging questions. Knowing what you now know, what would you do differently, or what advice would you give investors now compared to when you started 20 years ago? What have you learned throughout your years of experience that will either what you would stop doing or start doing or recommend for investors to start or stop doing?
To right up front, build your strategic relationships and build your network, because you need to have your team in place and you really need to rely on those people.
Okay. Now, can you give us some tips for our attendees tonight? What advice would you give investors on how to build strategic relationships?
I take a different take on it than a lot of other people. My
Okay.
answer is you meet as many people as you possibly can, because you never know who knows whom, and you never know what connections other people have. So the more people you meet and the more people you connect with, the more opportunity you have of building worthwhile and relationships that are going to end up bringing value to your business.
Okay, now what would you say is the number one business philosophy or strategy that has been instrumental in your success?
Instrumental in my success is building my network, absolutely. And it's not just my network of business referrals, it's my network within my own industry. Because I have made sure that I know as many people as I can who do the same thing I do, so that when a problem comes up on one of my files, I have people I can rely on to help me get it fixed.